When I came out of the hospital after fighting for my life, I never imagined the next shock waiting for me would come not from my illness, but from my own family. My daughter-in-law, the woman I trusted, the woman I welcomed into our home, had sold my house. The house my husband built with his bare hands, the house where our memories lived in every corner gone. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stood there on the sidewalk, holding my hospital file in one hand, staring at strangers walking through my living room. They looked at me like I was the intruder. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. Calm, because even in that moment of betrayal, I felt a strange certainty. I knew something she didn't. I knew how this story would end, and it would not be in her favor. You might wonder how she even did it. How could someone sell a house that didn't belong to them? She had taken advantage of the trust I placed in her, using my temporary vulnerability to her advantage. She got power of attorney, just for emergency bills while I was hospitalized. Just a few signatures, a few lies, and suddenly my life, my home, my sanctuary, had been handed over to strangers. But here's the thing about betrayal. It often underestimates the person it targets. People think that once they take everything from you, you'll crumble. They think you'll beg, fight, or maybe even disappear quietly. They don't count on quiet fury. They don't count on patience, on planning, on waiting for the right moment to turn the tables. As I stood there, watching movers carry my furniture out, listening to my daughter-in-law laugh with the strangers as if this was some kind of game, I made a promise to myself. I didn't know exactly how I would do it yet, but I knew one thing. The universe has a way of balancing itself. Karma has a way of walking back into the lives of those who think they can cheat it. And one day, I would see her working for me, not out of kindness, but because the power she thought she had was never really hers to take. I smiled. That smile wasn't for her. It was for me. It was the smile of someone who knows that loss is not the end, it's the beginning of strategy, of quiet revenge. The calm before the storm. And let me tell you, I have all the time in the world. People often ask me why I didn't shout, why I didn't call the police right away. And I tell them there is power in patience. There is power in letting someone show their true colors while you quietly observe. The more they think they've won, the more satisfying the end will be. And when that end came, it came exactly as I knew it would. My daughter-in-law, once full of arrogance, now sitting at my desk, taking orders, realizing that the house she sold wasn't just a building, it was a legacy. So if you're hearing this, like the video and tell me, what would you do if someone sold your home behind your back? Would you cry? Would you scream? Or would you smile, wait, and turn the tables in a way they never saw coming? Because I promise you this, there's a strange justice in life, and sometimes the people who think they've taken everything from you end up working for you, learning firsthand the cost of their greed. I was recovering from heart surgery, and every day felt like a victory. The beeping machines in the hospital had stopped, the nurses' footsteps faded, and I was finally home, my home, the only place that still felt like mine. The house had belonged to my husband, a man of quiet strength who built it with his own hands. Every brick, every corner, every crack in the wall carried a memory of us, a memory of our family. The mornings were my favorite. I would sit in the sunlit kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the steam curl like little ghosts rising from the cup. I'd run my fingers over the old photo frames lining the mantel, pictures of my husband, my son as a little boy, birthdays, holidays, laughter frozen in time. The gentle music playing from the old radio filled the rooms with a warm hum, a soundtrack to memories that were mine alone. My son had always been my pride, a thoughtful man, the kind who would check in every morning just to make sure I had eaten breakfast. And my daughter-in-law, well, she was a different story. Outwardly, she was sweet, smiling, caring. She would help me to the bedroom, fold my laundry, even cook the meals I loved. She would say, "Mom, rest, you need it. I'll take care of everything." And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But there were little things, subtle things that never sat right with me. A lingering look at a piece of jewelry. A pause when I mentioned the value of the house. The way she asked more questions about my finances than about my health. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it was just because I was weak, fragile, recovering from surgery. But even in the moments of peace, a small knot of unease stayed in my chest. We shared many quiet afternoons together. She would sit at the dining table while I worked on my knitting, telling stories about her childhood or about my son's childhood, stories I thought only I remembered. I would watch her, smiling, feeling a sense of gratitude. After all, she was family now, part of the life my husband and I had built. She laughed at my old jokes, remembered my husband's favorite songs, and even watered the garden in my absence. Everything seemed perfect. On some evenings, I would walk around the house, touching the walls, the staircase, the wooden banister polished by decades of hands. I would imagine my husband standing in the doorway, smiling at me. I could almost hear him say, "Take care of the house, it's our story." It was the calm before the storm, and I cherished it. Yet there were subtle signs I didn't recognize at the time. My daughter-in-law often asked to see the house papers, just to keep things in order. She would inquire about emergency funds, insurance policies, and bills. I told myself it was only practical. I was in no condition to manage everything. She made it seem like she was helping, like she had my best interest at heart. And because my son trusted her, I did too. I thought about how lucky I was to have a family who cared. My son would call me daily, sometimes even twice a day, just to check how I felt, to hear my voice. The sound of his laughter brought comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone. My daughter-in-law would join our calls, chatting politely, her tone always warm. I felt peace. I felt safe. The mornings in the garden were the best. I would sit on the old wooden bench my husband had built and watch the sunlight filter through the trees. Birds would hop from branch to branch, their tiny songs blending with the soft wind. I would sip my tea slowly, remembering family picnics, my son running through the yard, the smell of my husband's barbecue wafting through the summer air. These small moments made me feel grounded, alive, and grateful. I even let myself dream a little. Maybe I could host a small family gathering, have my grandchildren run through the hallways, hear their laughter echoing through the rooms my husband and I had loved so dearly. Maybe I could finally relax, knowing my life, my home, my family was secure. Little did I know, the security I felt was fragile, hanging by a thread I couldn't see. Behind the smiles, the polite gestures, the sweet words, there were intentions I never suspected. My daughter-in-law's politeness masked a quiet greed, a hunger for something that wasn't hers to take. My son, trusting and kind, remained oblivious to the storm quietly gathering under his roof. In those peaceful days, I tried to enjoy every moment. I walked slowly through each room, touching the familiar surfaces, remembering every detail. I sat in the living room, knitting, listening to the music my husband had loved, humming along, feeling connected to the life we had shared. The house smelled of tea and old wood, and the faint fragrance of the flowers I had planted years ago. Everything was calm, safe, and familiar. And yet, even in this calm, I couldn't shake the tiny sense of unease. A small warning, a whisper in the back of my mind that perhaps not everything was as it seemed. But I was recovering, and the thought of betrayal seemed too cruel to consider. I wanted to believe in my family. I wanted to believe in my daughter-in-law. I wanted to believe that my son's happiness was her happiness too. So I let myself live in the warmth, the nostalgia, the gentle music of our memories. I let myself feel grateful for the peace, unaware that the storm was already moving closer, already shaping itself in the shadows. I had no idea that the house my husband had built, the home I had poured my heart into, would soon be taken from me in the most shocking way imaginable, by the very person I had welcomed into my family with open arms. I had always been careful with my health, but heart problems don't send warnings in polite whispers. They hit like storms. One morning, I woke with a heavy chest, dizziness, and a fear I couldn't shake. My son rushed me to the hospital, and the next hours were a blur of beeping machines, doctors' hurried steps, and nurses checking vitals. I had survived heart surgery, and every breath I took afterward felt like a small victory. I thought the worst was behind me. I couldn't have been more wrong. While I lay in the hospital, slowly recovering, my mind should have been on healing. But even as my body mended, a part of me wanted to know what was happening at home. My son visited as often as he could, bringing flowers, blankets, and updates from the house. And my daughter-in-law, she was there too. Always attentive, always smiling, always polite. She told the nurses that she had power of attorney, just in case, for any emergency bills. I nodded weakly from my hospital bed. "Of course, dear." "Thank you for helping," I said, believing she had my best interest at heart. Little did I know, that small act of trust, a signature here, a paper there, would be the key to one of the cruelest betrayals of my life. The hospital room was quiet that evening, the soft hum of machines filling the air. I drifted in and out of sleep, thinking about my home, about the life my husband and I had built. I thought about the sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, the smell of old wood mingling with the faint scent of tea, and the garden where birds would hop from branch to branch in the mornings. I didn't know that the house I was imagining, the sanctuary I longed to return to, was slipping from my grasp without my knowledge. A few days later, I was finally discharged. The nurses helped me into the wheelchair, my son steadying me with gentle hands. I looked forward to seeing my home, my haven, the place where I could finally sit in my favorite armchair and breathe. I never imagined the scene that awaited me. When we arrived, I felt a strange chill. Something felt different. The gate was open. The garden looked the same at first glance, but the mailbox had a new nameplate. My heart skipped a beat. My son tried to reassure me. "Mom, it's probably nothing. Maybe the neighbors did something." But my instinct told me otherwise. I stepped up to the door, and then I saw them. Strangers. Men and women I had never met before, moving my furniture around like it had always belonged to them. They were laughing, talking loudly, completely at ease in what was once my home. My son and daughter-in-law followed behind me, and that's when I heard it. "Ma'am," one of them said, looking at me as if I had no right to be there. "We bought this house last week." I froze. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. My hospital file slipped from my hands and fell to the ground. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling, but the shock made my fingers clumsy. My mind refused to accept what I was hearing. Bought the house? Last week? My house? The house my husband had built, the place I had poured my heart into. My daughter-in-law stood next to me, her face carefully neutral, but there was a faint twitch of something in her eyes, a flicker of satisfaction she couldn't hide. My son looked just as stunned as I was, his face pale, jaw tight, and hands trembling. But I could see it in my daughter-in-law's calm demeanor. She had orchestrated this. She had planned it. And she had done it while I was recovering, trusting her to manage things. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to collapse right there in the driveway. But instead, I stood still. My chest still ached from the surgery, but my mind, sharp as ever, began to process what had happened. She had taken advantage of my trust, the fragility of my health, and the small legal permission I had granted her for emergencies. That small piece of paper had become her weapon. The strangers inside carried on as if I weren't even there. They rearranged my furniture, unpacked boxes, and even had the audacity to comment on my belongings. "This couch is nice, but we might replace it," one of them said. Another laughed, holding one of my husband's old chairs, saying, "Your mother-in-law had good taste." My blood ran cold, not just with shock, but with a quiet, burning fury. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger rise, steady and controlled. I had always believed in kindness, in patience, in facing the world calmly. And now that calmness became my shield. I would not cry, I would not beg, I would not fight blindly. I would wait, I would plan, I would watch. The driveways, the front porch, the garden, everything had become a stage for a betrayal I would never forget. I could see my reflection in the glass door, holding my hospital file like a talisman, a symbol of the life that had been stolen from me. I stood there, in shock at first, disbelief paralyzing me. And then, slowly, that disbelief transformed into something far more powerful, quiet fury. My daughter-in-law avoided my gaze, but I caught it. That tiny, fleeting glance told me everything I needed to know. She had thought she had won, thought she had secured her victory. She didn't realize that by underestimating me, she had set the stage for her own reckoning. I walked around the perimeter of the house, pretending to examine the garden, the gate, the windows, as if I had simply returned from a short trip. But inside, I was noting every detail, every person, every move. I knew names would have to be learned, habits observed, weaknesses discovered. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. I simply needed to remember, to observe, to let them reveal their true selves. That evening, I sat on the curb outside my former living room window. The house was alive with strangers, with laughter and casual movement that made my chest tighten. But in my mind, I was already several steps ahead. They had taken the house, yes, but they had underestimated the woman they had betrayed. I was still standing. I was still thinking. I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, they had not won. I realized something essential in that moment. Power is not in possession alone. Power is in patience, in foresight, in understanding the weaknesses of those who believe they have bested you. My daughter-in-law had made a critical error. She assumed my vulnerability meant I was weak. She assumed my calm meant I was defeated. But calmness, I learned that day, is often the most dangerous weapon of all. And so I let them be, at least for now. I returned to my small apartment across town where I would sleep, eat, and plan. I had no illusions about the struggle ahead. I knew it wouldn't be easy to reclaim what was mine. But the anger inside me, quiet yet ferocious, fueled something else: clarity. I could see the path ahead. I could see the mistakes they would make. I could see the way karma would walk back through that house, step by careful step. As I lay in bed that night, the hum of the city outside a distant echo, I thought of my husband. I thought of the life we had built, of the memories embedded in every wall, every floorboard. And I smiled. Not because I had won, not yet, but because I knew the story was not over. In fact, it was just beginning. And one day, I promised myself she would be sitting at my desk, taking orders, realizing that the house she thought she could steal was never hers to take. I could almost see it, the quiet, inevitable justice of the universe unfolding. The calm before the storm, now transformed into a storm she would feel firsthand. For now, the strangers had my home, but they did not have my mind, my resolve, my plan. And that, I realized, was far more powerful than walls, gates, or signatures on paper. I could barely breathe as I watched the strangers move through the house that had been mine. Every familiar corner, every piece of furniture, every photo frame, all of it claimed by people I didn't know, and worse, by the person I had trusted most, my daughter-in-law. I clutched my hospital file in one hand, the only tangible piece of my life left in that moment. My son stepped closer, his face tense, but his voice was calm, too calm. "Mom," he said, trying to sound rational, "you have to understand. She did it for money, we needed it." I blinked. The words barely registered at first. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I could feel the world tilting beneath me. Needed it, needed it. Did he not see what she had done? Did he not see the betrayal, the lies, the sheer audacity of selling the home of the man who had raised him? "She needed it," I whispered finally, my voice trembling. "She sold my house. She sold it while I was recovering from heart surgery, and you're defending her." His eyes flickered, trying to meet mine, but he didn't. He shifted his weight as if the truth were too heavy to hold. "Mom, it's complicated. You don't understand everything. We had no choice." I felt a deep ache in my chest, worse than any post-surgery pain. It wasn't just the betrayal by my daughter-in-law. It was the heartbreak of realizing that my own son had turned blind, that he couldn't see right from wrong in this moment. The son I had raised, the boy who used to run into my arms after every scraped knee, now stood as a barrier between me and justice. His loyalty had shifted, his love blinded by excuses. I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse right there on the sidewalk. But instead, I did something else. I let myself feel the heartbreak fully, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing on my chest. I looked once more at the home I had poured my life into, the home my husband had built, now alive with strangers who had no idea what it truly meant. Then I did the only thing I could. I reached for my suitcase, just one. The one that held my essentials, my identity, my resolve. I packed it slowly, methodically, letting each movement anchor me, reminding me that I was still standing, still breathing, still myself. My son called my name again. "Mom, please don't go like this. Stay with us. We can figure it out." I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes, but my voice steady. "No, I can't stay where my home has been stolen, where my trust has been shattered. I need to walk away for now." As I turned and walked down the driveway, suitcase in hand, I felt the weight of all the years pressed down on me, the years of love, care, and family memories. But even in that moment of devastation, I felt something else stirring inside me, a quiet fire, a determination that would not be quenched. I paused at the edge of the street, looking back at the house one last time. The movers carried on as if I weren't there, laughing with my daughter-in-law. My son stood frozen, caught between his wife and his mother, unable to bridge the impossible gap. And I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, They think they've thrown me out. They think they've won. But they've only pushed me toward what comes next. My voiceover, soft and steady in my mind, echoed those words. They thought they threw me out, but they only pushed me toward my revenge. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just betrayal. It was clarity. A sense that the universe had handed me the tools, if not the timing, to reclaim what was mine and to ensure justice in a way that would be unforgettable. Each step away from the house was heavy with sorrow, but also with resolve. The city sidewalk beneath my feet felt strangely grounding, a reminder that the world did not end at my front gate. The world was still full of possibilities, full of paths that could lead to justice, and full of lessons that my daughter-in-law would one day learn. I passed neighbors, friends, and strangers who looked at me with curiosity, concern, or pity. I ignored them all. Their opinions, their questions, their sympathy, none of it mattered. What mattered was that I was alive, that I was free to think, to plan, to act. And I would act with patience and precision because that was the weapon I had learned to wield over a lifetime. By the time I reached the small apartment I had rented nearby, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. I sat on the edge of the bed, suitcase by my side, and allowed myself a moment to breathe. The weight of loss pressed down, but the fire inside me burned brighter than ever. I thought of my husband, of the house he had built, of the memories embedded in every wall, and I smiled quietly to myself. The betrayal was bitter, yes. The heartbreak was raw, but the clarity it brought was sharper than any pain. My daughter-in-law had assumed she had outsmarted me. My son had assumed I would crumble. They were both wrong. I would not beg, I would not plead. I would not act rashly. I would plan, I would wait, and when the time was right, they would see the cost of underestimating me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over. The words of my son defending his wife echoed in my mind. We needed it, as if betrayal could ever be justified by money, as if a lifetime of love, trust, and family could be measured in dollars. I thought of the life I had lived, the patience I had shown, the kindness I had offered. And I realized that all of it, every act of generosity, every gesture of trust, had brought me to this moment. They had thought that by taking my home, they had taken my power. But they had not counted on one thing, the power of a woman who had been wronged, who had been pushed to the edge, and who was now walking forward with purpose. My suitcase felt heavy, but not with belongings. It was heavy with intention, with resolve, with the quiet promise that justice would come in its own time. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to confront them immediately. I only needed to be patient, to observe, and to wait for the perfect moment to reclaim what was mine. As I closed the door behind me that night, leaving the street, the house, and the betrayal behind, I whispered to myself once more. They thought they threw me out, but they only pushed me toward my revenge. And in that whisper, I felt the first stirrings of satisfaction. Not yet full victory, not yet the end, but the first taste of the power I had regained simply by refusing to be broken. After leaving my son and daughter-in-law behind, I didn't know where to go. My heart felt heavy, but I knew I couldn't collapse under the weight of betrayal. I reached out to an old friend from my church, Mrs. Kapoor, who had always been a steady presence in my life. She welcomed me with open arms, insisting I stay at her small apartment until I could figure out my next steps. The first few days were quiet. I spent time reminiscing, drinking warm tea in her kitchen, listening to her gentle voice as she recounted stories from our youth. It was comforting, the familiarity of friendship and shared memories easing the ache in my chest. But the peace was short-lived. One afternoon, Mrs. Kapoor handed me a piece of paper, her eyes serious. I thought you should know, she said softly. The house, it wasn't sold at market value. Your daughter-in-law sold it for half the price, and the buyer, well, he's connected to her. It was all a setup. I felt the room spin. Half the price, a fake buyer. My home, my husband's legacy, my memories, reduced to a transaction engineered by someone I had trusted. For a moment, pain washed over me in waves, making me clutch the edge of the table. But as quickly as it came, the pain shifted. It transformed into something else, something sharper, something stronger, determination. I realized then that anger alone would not restore what had been taken from me. Shouting, crying, or confronting them in haste would only give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to reclaim not just my home but my dignity, I needed to approach this differently, with wisdom, patience, and work. I began thinking about what I could do, not just to survive but to rise again. I remembered the skills I had nurtured over the years: cooking, sewing, organizing, helping people. There were ways to rebuild, to create something new, to remind myself and the world that I was still capable, still powerful, and still independent. I decided to start small. Every morning I would rise early, as I had always done, preparing meals from recipes my husband and I had perfected over decades. I set up a small food stall near the local market. At first, it was modest, just a few dishes, a table, and a simple sign. But there was something about the way people responded to my cooking, the warmth in their smiles, the way they came back for more. Slowly, my reputation grew. Some days I would return home exhausted but satisfied. Each plate I served, each customer who complimented my food felt like a small victory. It wasn't the house, it wasn't the betrayal, but it was mine. My effort, my independence, my strength. I also used my free evenings to plan. I studied local laws, researched real estate loopholes, and quietly reached out to contacts who could help me understand how the sale had been manipulated. Every bit of knowledge was a tool, every connection a potential ally. I wasn't rushing into revenge blindly. I was building a foundation. The days turned into weeks. My small food stall became a hub of activity, not just for the food, but for the respect I earned through hard work. I felt my confidence returning. The pain of betrayal was still there, a scar etched deep, but it no longer weighed me down. Instead, it sharpened my focus, fueled my determination, and reminded me why I had to fight back not with anger, but with strategy, skill, and patience. As I stood behind my stall one morning, watching the sun rise over the market, I made a silent vow. I would reclaim what was mine, piece by piece. I would expose the lies, reveal the manipulation, and ensure that the daughter-in-law who had betrayed me understood the cost of her actions. But I would do it on my terms, through my work, through my intellect, and through the power I still possessed. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt hope. Not naive hope, but calculated hope, built on determination, planning, and hard work. The storm had come, yes, but I had found my footing and I was ready. This was my new beginning. My chance to rebuild, to rise, and to prove that even after betrayal, even after loss, a woman with wisdom and courage could turn pain into power. Day by day, I poured myself into my work. Each morning, I rose before the sun, preparing meals, setting up my stall, and greeting customers with a smile that hid the fire burning inside me. My honesty and work ethic didn't go unnoticed. Regulars began recommending me to friends, neighbors, and even local business owners. Soon, investors who had heard about my food stall approached me, offering small but meaningful support to help me expand. The first few weeks were a blur of activity. I saved every penny I could, documenting each expense, each sale, and every bit of advice given by the seasoned business people who took an interest in me. I registered my business officially, getting a license, setting up a small office, and even hiring one assistant to help me manage the growing operations. Every day felt like a step toward reclaiming not just financial stability, but also dignity and control over my life. There were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, yet in those quiet pauses, I would whisper to myself, as if affirming a personal mantra. They took my house, but they couldn't take my strength. That strength had carried me through betrayal, heartbreak, and loss. It would carry me forward into a future I was determined to shape for myself. Montages of my days played in my mind like a movie. Chopping vegetables in the early morning light, counting coins while humming my husband's favorite songs, registering contracts and business permits, meeting with suppliers, planning menus, and mapping out strategies for growth. Every action, no matter how small, built toward something larger. Each day I felt a sense of pride, a growing belief that I was more than the sum of what had been taken from me. Meanwhile, across town, my daughter-in-law's ventures were crumbling. The fake buyer she had conned to take the house at half price wasn't interested in any real partnership. Debts piled up, suppliers stopped delivering, and customers began leaving. She tried to maintain a facade of confidence, but every phone call from a creditor tightened the noose around her business. She had built her empire on shortcuts, lies, and manipulation. And now, like all unsustainable structures, it was collapsing under its own weight. One afternoon, she came across an advertisement in the local newspaper. Food consultancy and catering services, hearing entry-level staff. She didn't realize it at first, but the address led her to my growing company. Exhausted, desperate, and with no other options, she walked into my office seeking employment. She had no idea that the woman she had betrayed, whose home she had stolen, was the one standing at the front desk, smiling politely, checking her application. For a moment, I studied her. The arrogance that had once seemed so natural was gone, replaced by uncertainty, fear, and a hint of regret. She did not recognize the calm power I now carried, a power built not from manipulation, but from persistence, integrity, and hard work. Inwardly, I smiled. The first move in my long game of justice was about to unfold. The twist of fate, one I had quietly anticipated, was finally here. The daughter-in-law, who had thought she could take everything from me, was unknowingly stepping into the world I had created, a world that I had built with my own hands, my own patience, and my own strength. It was a busy Monday morning at the office. My staff were bustling, phones ringing, emails pinging, and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. I sat behind my polished desk, reviewing orders and checking reports, completely immersed in the rhythm of my growing business. Everything was running smoothly, just as I had worked so hard to ensure. Then the HR manager appeared at the doorway, holding a clipboard. "Ma'am, we have a new recruit for the sales team," she said politely, unaware of the storm that was about to enter our lives. I looked up casually, expecting another entry-level applicant. But when the door opened, the world seemed to slow for a fraction of a second. The figure in the doorway froze. Her eyes widened, her mouth slightly open. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. And then I saw it, my daughter-in-law, standing there in a neatly pressed shirt and black trousers, holding a folder in her hands, as if ready to start her first day. Her face went pale, and for a moment she looked almost like a child caught in mischief. I leaned back in my chair, calmly observing, feeling a quiet, undeniable satisfaction welling up inside me. This was the moment I had anticipated, the moment the universe had delivered exactly as it should. I smiled lightly, letting the silence stretch just enough to let her realize the situation. Then I spoke, my voice calm, steady, and unmistakably in control. "Welcome aboard," I said, placing a neatly organized folder of sales reports in front of her. "You sold my house. Now let's see how well you can sell my products." Her eyes darted from the folder to my face and back again. The arrogance that had once come so naturally to her was gone, replaced by shock, disbelief, and a dawning understanding. She had underestimated me once, and now she was learning in real time the consequences of her actions. There was no shouting, no cruel words, no public humiliation. The satisfaction I felt was not born of malice, but of justice and dignity. She would work here, under the woman she had betrayed, and she would learn what it meant to earn respect, to build trust, and to face the consequences of her choices. I could see her taking a tentative step forward, hesitating as her mind raced through 1,000 excuses, apologies, and regrets. But I didn't give her any of that comfort. I simply handed her the first client file and said, "Your first task is to contact these clients. Treat them well. Sell honestly. And remember, every product you represent reflects the integrity you used to lack." Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the file, but I could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Recognition that she was no longer in control. Recognition that I had not only survived the betrayal, but had turned it into power, into growth, into a new life that she could never take away. As she walked toward her desk, I leaned back and allowed myself a quiet moment of satisfaction. This wasn't about cruelty, it was about justice. The lesson would be learned not through anger, but through experience, through witnessing the strength, resilience, and fairness of someone she had tried to deceive. And in that slow, cinematic moment, as the office continued around us unaware of the personal drama unfolding, I realized this was the turning point. The house had been sold, the betrayal had happened, but now the story had shifted entirely. The balance of power was restored, quietly, perfectly, and with the satisfaction that only comes from patience and wisdom. It was a late evening in the office. The lights were soft, the hum of computers low, and the scent of freshly brewed tea drifting from the small kitchenette. I was reviewing client reports, my mind focused on the growth of the business, when I noticed her, my daughter-in-law, sitting at her desk, head in her hands. The confident, arrogant facade she had carried for years was gone, replaced by a raw, vulnerable figure I barely recognized. I walked over slowly, keeping my voice gentle. "Is everything all right?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. She lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks, and the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was greedy. I let peer pressure, money, and lies guide me. I sold your house, and I didn't think about what it would do to you, to your life." For a moment, I didn't respond. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I didn't berate her. Instead, I let her words sink into the quiet of the office. The shame she carried was evident. She was learning a lesson far deeper than money could ever teach. "I understand what you're saying," I finally said, my voice calm, measured. "But words alone cannot repair what was broken. You cannot undo the past. What you can do is face it, accept it, and work to make amends, slowly, steadily, with integrity." Her shoulders shook as she nodded. She realized then that I had not sought revenge through cruelty. My justice had been patient, silent, and powerful. She had entered my world thinking she could take from me and get away with it. Now she was learning that every choice has consequences. I handed her a new project folder, one I had been carefully designing over the past months. "This project," I said, "is about building homes for women and families in need. Your task is to assist, to contribute honestly, to help create something meaningful." Her hands trembled as she accepted the folder, but she looked up at me with a mix of fear, awe, and gratitude. She understood now that the power dynamic had shifted completely. No more shortcuts, no more deception. Here, she would work to earn respect, to prove herself, and to repay what she had taken not in anger or punishment, but in genuine effort. "You stole my home once," I said quietly, leaning against my desk. "But now you help me build homes for others. You will learn that trust and integrity cannot be taken. They must be earned every single day." Tears ran down her cheeks as she nodded, finally seeing the truth that had eluded her. Real power does not come from taking, but from creating. Real respect is earned through work, patience, and honesty. And real justice is not in shouting or revenge, but in letting someone confront the consequences of their own actions. From that evening on, the office changed. She worked diligently, quietly, learning to contribute with sincerity. I watched her grow in understanding and humility, knowing that the lesson was far more valuable than any punishment I could have imposed. My business continued to flourish, not just in profits, but in purpose. And in that calm, steady rhythm of rebuilding, I felt the ultimate satisfaction. The home she had stolen from me had been replaced, not by walls or bricks, but by empowerment, dignity, and a life rebuilt through patience, wisdom, and work. Weeks turned into months, and slowly life settled into a new rhythm. My daughter-in-law, once arrogant and greedy, had changed. She arrived at work each day with sincerity, completing tasks diligently, listening carefully, and learning to contribute without shortcuts or excuses. Her once sharp, self-centered gaze softened into one of focus and respect. Humility had replaced arrogance, and every action she took seemed to carry the weight of the lessons she had learned. My son, seeing the transformation, returned one afternoon. His shoulders were heavy with shame, his eyes downcast. "Mom," he said quietly, I didn't see it before. I defended her when I should have seen the truth. I'm sorry." I looked at him, taking in the remorse etched on his face. My heart ached, but I had learned patience, and I had learned the value of boundaries. "I forgive you," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You must understand the consequences of turning a blind eye. Let this be a lesson for both of you." Evening fell, and the air was calm and warm. I sat on my porch, the cup of tea warming my hands, just as I had done before the storm hit my life. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves, birds hopped in the garden, and the sun painted everything in soft golden hues. There was peace here now, not fragile but earned. From the window, I could see my daughter-in-law working with quiet determination, arranging materials, checking details, and learning the value of effort and honesty. She moved differently now, not as someone who had taken what she wanted, but as someone contributing to something larger than herself. I allowed myself a quiet smile. The lessons had been hard, the journey painful, but the ending was true. Justice had been restored, not through cruelty, but through patience, wisdom, and work. I had survived betrayal, reclaimed my dignity, and even guided the person who had wronged me toward growth and responsibility. As I sipped my tea and watched the soft rhythm of life around me, I whispered the truth that had become the essence of this story. She once sold my house for greed, now she builds my dreams with her hands. And in that moment, I felt complete. The storm had passed. My home, my life, my peace had been restored. The house, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they are memories now, lessons etched into the story of my life. I've learned something that no one can take from me. Strength, patience, and dignity are worth far more than any building, any money, or any possession. Money can build walls, but it can't buy peace. Greed can take what you own, but it can't touch your will, your mind, or your determination. And sometimes, the most powerful way to respond to betrayal isn't through shouting, anger, or revenge. It's through calm, steady success. By building your life, by proving your worth, and by letting your integrity shine, you achieve something far greater than retaliation. I watched my daughter-in-law learn humility, respect, and the value of work. I saw my son realize the cost of blind loyalty. And through it all, I remained steady, patient, and true to myself. That, I realized, was the ultimate victory, not in taking from them, but in reclaiming my life with wisdom, resilience, and grace. So I sit here on my porch, a cup of tea warming my hands, the garden alive with birds and sunlight, reflecting on everything that happened. The storm passed, and peace returned. My life, rebuilt with care and patience, stands stronger than ever. And now I turn to you, watching this story unfold. Betrayal can hurt deeply, even shatter trust. But what would you do? Would you forgive, move on, and rebuild with strength, or would you make those who hurt you face the consequences of their actions? Tell me in the comments, if your own family betrayed you, would you forgive, or would you make them face what they did? Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger, it's success, wisdom, and a life lived on your own terms.